Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Paul Hindemith, Essential Works for Beginners. And beginners, don't be afraid of Hindemith. People sort of step back from him because he was a formidable music educator and theorist. I know people who studied with him at Yale, and he was tough. He expected you to be able to play every single instrument because he could, and to know everything that there was to know, from medieval music up to like last week. But he was also a marvelous composer, a true humanist. He was active as a composer from the 1920s up until his death in the early 1960s, and really wrote some beautiful, marvelous music to get to know. Very serious guy. He had a sense of humor. He did. And his music could be funny, actually, in sort of German funny, which is kind of, clunky and awkward funny. But it's funny. It still works. And we're going to take you through, 10 major works here. And you'll get a sense, I think, of the things that occupied him the most and his own style. He never turned his back on tonality. And so for that reason, he was held up in the first half of the 20th century by people who thought that there was still an alternative to the academic, serial, avant-garde, atonal crew. Ultimately, after he passed away, that particular style turned out to be his own. It wasn't a school as much as he might have wanted to create one. And so his music fell into a certain decline. But it's always been admired because of its craftsmanship, its warmth. It was quite a bit of it, actually. It developed some. It didn't start that way. It's very interesting. We'll get to that. And also just for, his sheer purposefulness. I mean, he was just extraordinarily well-trained and educated composer. He played the viola in the string quartet. And there's some stories here, but we'll get to them when we talk about the individual works. So let's begin with his Symphonic Metamorphosis of Themes by Carl Maria von Weber. The title doesn't really sell the piece, does it? I mean, it really doesn't, but it's wonderful. It's based mostly on piano four-hand music by Carl Maria von Weber, which means it has wonderful tunes from the dawn of the Romantic era, and Hindemith manipulates them in the form of a four-movement symphony. The scherzo is based on a Chinese melody, a pentatonic melody, from Weber's music to the Gozzi play Turandot. Puccini's last opera was Turandot. It's the same story. And Busoni wrote an opera called Turandot, and so did Weber. And so Hindemith takes this little Chinese tune and does some very jazzy things with it. It's just a wonderfully brilliant work that ends with a march, with a tune that's going to have you humming for the rest of your life. Dun da da dum da 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 ba da dum ba da dum bum ba da dum bum ba da 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 da. If I can do it, so can you. Really fun music to listen to, and a very popular work. He wrote it in the 1940s when he was teaching at Yale, when he was in New Haven during the Second World War. He wound up having to flee Germany for reasons we'll get to in a moment. It's a fabulous story, and it was the topic of my first master's thesis, so I know something about it. Anyway, the next work is one of his really lesser-known pieces, but it's the Symphony in E-flat. Really fabulous symphony that for some reason people just don't know. It doesn't get played, and it really deserves to. It has a really short opening movement that sounds sort of like Star Wars. It's like, heroic Superman movie music. You can see the spaceships cruising through. Really exciting. Then there's a long and very elegiac sort of funeral march type thing, featuring a lot of the brass. Very powerful and very beautiful, really beautiful. A zippy scherzo, and another march-like finale that ends with just this lollapalooza of a climax. Why it's not more popular, I really have no idea. Leonard Bernstein made a fabulous recording of it, and there's also a very good one on Chandos with Paul Tortelier conducting. I mean, it's been well treated on disc, but it needs to be played with all the guts and balls you can imagine, and it's just fantastic. The next work is another symphony, the symphony Mathis der Maler. Mathis der Maler. The symphony is extracted from interludes that he wrote for his opera of the same title. It means Mathis the painter. And he's talking about Matthias Grunwald, who was the creator of the famous Isenheim altarpiece, which you can go look up on Google. Look up Grunwald, Isenheim altarpiece, and you'll see it. It's very beautiful and very medieval. It's got some creepy demons and angels, a choir of angels, and all kinds of cool stuff. And each movement has a title based on one of the panels from this altarpiece. It begins with the Concert of Angels. There are 3 of them, each playing a different instrument. You hear each one in this movement. And then there's the Entombment of Christ, a gentle but funereal movement. And then the Temptation of Saint Anthony. Oh, the demons. And it ends with a glorious Alleluia. It's a fabulous work, and it's an amazing opera. But what happened, the story is wonderful, actually, and I'll just tell it to you briefly. Hindemith was the rising star, the bright light of German contemporary music. And when Hitler came to power, he was disdainful of the Nazi Party, and he also was undergoing sort of a personal artistic crisis. His earlier music had been very neoclassical and dissonant and sort of avant-garde, and he felt that it was necessary to write music that was more approachable, that would create a relationship between the artist and the audience similar to what had existed in the Baroque and classical periods, when people actually went to hear classical music that was new and enjoyed it. That didn't mean his music was easy or he dumbed it down, but it did become more tonal, more melodic. He incorporated German folk melodies into his style while maintaining the same sort of, compositional rigor, the counterpoint and all that stuff. And the harmonic modernity that he had been working with up to that point. And his great vision of, this rapprochement between composers and the audience was supposed to be this opera, Mathis der Maler. And he wrote it in full knowledge of what was going on in Germany at the time. It included scenes, for example, of book burning. And, basically it was a plea for the government to stay out of the arts, to let artists create and be artists, and let art approach the people on its own terms and not to politicize everything. Well, to say that he was a little bit naive about what the Nazi Party wanted and what fascism was is to put it mildly. The opera was banned. And he extracted this symphony from the opera for separate performance. And it was performed by no less than Wilhelm Furtwängler with the Berlin Philharmonic. It was wildly successful. And the Nazi Party, seeing that he was successful, immediately banned a lot of his music generally, and reproached him and said that it was not Nazi music, which is what they wanted. In protest at the treatment of Hindemith and the banning of his music, Furtwängler resigned all of his posts, causing an international scandal. He later, wimped out and took up his posts again for reasons that, are very controversial, and we don't have to go into them. But the bottom line, forget about Furtwängler, is that Hindemith wound up leaving Germany. And he never went back because he felt that, he had been rejected by the people who he most wanted to reach and speak to. And so he went to the United States, sat out the war, moved back after the war to Europe, but to Switzerland, just over the border. I mean, he worked in Germany. He went to Germany, gave concerts in Germany, but he would not live in Germany ever again. He decided that was it. And so that's sort of the story, the backdrop behind this work. And it's an incredibly dramatic and dynamic and splendid piece of music. So, you'll want to hear it. Trust me, you'll really want to hear it. It's not just, a historical document, but it's an artistic document of the highest quality and importance. So after that, let's do his ballet, Nobilissima Visione, Beautiful, beautiful, sweet. It's about St. Anthony or St. somebody. I don't even remember which saint. The music's lovely. There's a 3-movement orchestral suite. That's it's gorgeous. It's beautiful, beautiful music, and it has that wonderful harmonic edge that he developed. He developed a theory of harmony. Classical harmony is based on the triad, right? The major or chord or the minor chord, 3 notes, a third apart. The interval is the third. Well, his interval was the 4th, which makes his music more dissonant and a little bit strange sounding, because where you should think you're going to hear major chords, sometimes you don't. And so the music resolves in interesting ways, but it created a wholly personal style, a wonderful characteristic style that some composers later imitated or were influenced by. And you can hear it very clearly in these various works. There's a joke in the music biz among conservatory students with Hindemith. You start with a C major chord, then you go crazy and do whatever you want, then you end with a C major chord. As long as it ends with a C major chord, it's Hindemith. I mean, that was sort of the gag when I was talking to music students and things like that. But there's some truth to it. So these first 4 works are big, major orchestral pieces, and they should really get you into his style. But then he wrote lots of music. He was very, very prolific. Let's do a little vocal music. He wrote a lovely song cycle called Das Marienleben, The Life of Mary, to poems by Rilke. And it's really, really lovely. It's originally written for soprano and piano, and it's a big thing. There's lots of poems. But then he extracted about 5 poems and orchestrated them and made a smaller song cycle that's really, really quite marvelous. It begins with a tune. Da 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 ba da 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 da. It's a characteristic melody. It appears in like everything he wrote. Once you get to know his music and you get to hear some of these pieces, you'll hear this characteristic theme that seems to permeate a lot of what he does. And we'll hear that tune in some other pieces that we're going to talk about in a minute. But it's a wonderful work, and it shows a more tender and gentle side, I think, of his art. And he was also a believing Catholic, and it reflects his faith, and that's always a good thing, when composers are doing that sort of stuff. Excuse me. So, Das Marienleben, definitely worth hearing, but start with the orchestral version rather than the piano version, because it's much easier to take it. It's much shorter. The Violin Concerto is one of the great 20th century violin concertos. It's fabulous. It's been recorded by major violinists like Isaac Stern and David Oistrakh, and it's well written for the instrument. And it has a very large orchestra, actually. It's exciting, and give it a shot if you like violin concertos. Also, his Cello Concerto. The Cello Concerto is much less well known than it deserves to be. It has the Das Marienleben theme in the slow movement. Ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da. That's it. And the theme of the slow movement was used by William Walton in his variations on a theme by Hindemith. So if you like the Cello Concerto and you think the slow movement is beautiful, and it is, then listen to Walton's variations on a theme by Hindemith, which is just a masterpiece, fabulous commentary by one composer who was a great admirer of the other. So there's that. Then we've got, the concert music for strings and brass. Now, in his avant-garde phase in the 1920s, when he wasn't doing symphonies and things, he wrote pieces simply called concert music. The idea was to partake in a movement called the Neue Sachlichkeit, which is new objectivity. Music as like a structure, a thing, like a mobile, like a 3-dimensional object, but it had no other purpose than to be an abstract object. And a lot of the music from that period, people tend to think it's rather dry. I think it's refreshing, actually. It's kind of like, a tangy sorbet. It's tart. It's not sentimental. One of the great, in the scores for these pieces, he often writes, ohne pathos, without pathos. And if you listen to the music that's happening when he writes that, you're like, oh yeah, right. Like I would really be tempted to inject pathos into this music that's going chaka 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 chaka. You know, I mean, there's no pathos in it. But the concert music for strings and brass is exactly what it says it is. It's two movements for a brass section and a string section. And it has some terrific tunes. Fabulous tunes. It's jazzy stuff too. I mean, there's all kinds of, you know, it's not difficult. It has its dissonant elements, but it's brilliant and it's athletic and it has just this irresistible energy. I mean, the tune in the finale, da ba da dum ba da dum ba da 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 da. I can do it. So if I can do it, you can listen to it, and it's really, really cool. Bernstein actually used a bit of the first movement in his young people's concerts to talk about, you know, this fourth-based harmony that Hindemith was using and how he could create characteristic and beautiful melodies out of it. So you should give that a shot. Then, okay, if you like early Hindemith and you're getting into that Neue Sachlichkeit, try his Kammermusik, chamber music. It's like concert music. There's concert music and there's chamber music. These are 7 concertos. They're for chamber orchestra. They're orchestral pieces. They're not like string quartets. He wrote several string quartets, actually, which you could explore. He wrote sonatas for every single instrument in the universe. And he learned to play each one before he wrote the sonata. And he could play all of the sonatas. Phenomenal. Anyway, Kammermusik are a series of violin, a series of 7 concertos. One is just, the first one isn't a concerto. It's just a weird piece for chamber orchestra that's lots of fun. It's got a foxtrot in it and some stuff like that. Then the rest are concertos. There's an organ concerto and a piano concerto and a viola concerto and a violin concerto, and you know, all for different combinations of instruments based on Baroque practice, basically. The model for these works is Bach. It's Baroque practice. The music is very, motoric. That's the word, motoric. You know, once it gets started, it just keeps going, chugga, 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 like this. And I find it very enjoyable. You may not. You know, you give it a shot. See what you think. You know, there may be moments when you're just in the mood for something that has no pathos, but just has lots of energy and verve and doesn't go where you may expect it to. It's an adventure. So there are 7 of these suckers. They all fit on basically 2 CDs, and they're fun. They're really fun to listen to. And last but not least, one of his grandest choral works, a Requiem for Those We Love, subtitled When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. This is a beautiful work written in the wake of World War II. It's poetry by Walt Whitman in English. A setting of that poem, which was written as an elegy on the death of Abraham Lincoln originally. And it's a splendid work. It really is. Again, it gets very little play, not nearly the kind of attention it deserves. It's moving and austere. It's similar in sort of scope and style to Brahms' German Requiem. That is, it's a work not about death, but about consolation and remembrance. And it really deserves to be a standard repertory piece. And if you enjoy Hindemith and you get to know him, then you'll want to hear this piece, because it's really a special experience and a fabulous work that deserves far more press and attention than it's ever going to get, probably. So there you have it, my friends. 10 major works by Paul Hindemith, a composer who at the moment seems to be a little bit on the outs with the artistic or musical universe, I think, but undeservedly so, and who you can explore. He's been very well recorded and very well treated on disc, so you can explore these pieces at your leisure and get to know him, as the mood takes you. You should. He's a tremendous, tremendous artist. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.